Dream sequences are dangerous on television because the second a scene doesn't have to be real, a writer can put almost anything in it. Guilt the story hasn't earned, foreshadowing nobody could possibly have, a dead character brought back for 2 minutes because somebody needs to be told something. You can suspend the rules for 5 minutes, call it a subconscious, wake everybody up, and none of it technically has to matter afterward. So dream sequences are often used sparingly. The Sopranos keeps doing them. Dreams, fantasies, hallucinations, a near-death experience, a coma that David Chase has specifically resisted calling a dream, people seeing the dead while they're apparently wide awake, a psychic who knows things he has no way of knowing, and at the very end, a cat that apparently spends most of its day staring at a photograph of Christopher. By the time the show finishes, the categories barely hold, and I don't think that's an accident either, which should make the whole thing a mess, and instead some of the best material in the series happens while nobody's technically conscious. Now, I'm not going to try and tell you what every object means. Chase has said enough apparently contradictory things about this over the years that building a dictionary out of it would miss the point. He's defended the dreams as meaningful and worth interpreting, and he's also flatly resisted the idea that every image translates into something. Lorraine Bracco has said she once asked him what one of Melfi's dreams meant, and got told that sometimes a dream doesn't mean anything. Both of those can be true, and I think the distinction that holds them together is that the dreams are interpretable without being solvable. There's usually something real underneath, an anxiety, a suspicion, a wish, a piece of information somebody's been keeping at arm's length. But a riddle has an answer and a dream has relationships, and the dream doesn't hand you a key, it rearranges the material. And the first one we hear about is small enough to show you how that works. Tony had been feeding a family of wild ducks that landed in his pool, and he cared about those ducks with an intensity that confused him as much as anybody. Then one morning they flew away. Tony came outside, found the pool empty, and collapsed from a panic attack. That collapse is what eventually put him in Jennifer Melfi's office. Very early in the therapy, he tells her about a dream. His belly button was a screw. He unscrewed it, and his penis fell off, and he was standing there trying to work out how to get it put back on when a bird came down and took it and flew away. Melfi keeps steering him back toward the ducks, and eventually he gets there himself. When they left, he'd felt like his family was going to leave with them, which is the first thing worth saying about how this show does dreams. Tony didn't need the dream to find out he was frightened of losing his family. We'd already watched his body find that out for him in his own backyard, and the emotional fact was sitting there before anybody interpreted anything. What the dream supplies is the version he'd never have chosen. Loss and sex and humiliation and helplessness, all compressed into one stupid image of a bird flying off with his penis. And that gap is the actual subject of this whole video, because Tony spends nearly all his waking life doing the opposite of that. He organizes. There's a Tony for Carmela, and a Tony for the children, and a Tony for Junior, and a Tony for the crew, and a Tony for Melfi, and sometimes they overlap and often they don't, and even when he's telling the truth he's editing, and even alone in a room he can take a memory and arrange it into something he's able to carry around. A dream doesn't make him honest. People lie to themselves unconsciously all the time. Tony argues inside these things. He justifies himself. He complains. He explains what's happening to whoever's standing there. What he loses is the room. The props are all his, and the people are all his, and the memories are all his, and he still doesn't get to decide which of them show up together. And years later, talking about why dreams interested him for this particular character, Chase described more or less exactly that. Tony's whole existence depends on control, and a dream is somewhere control doesn't work. So he can still perform once he's inside. He just didn't cast it. The show starts teaching you this almost immediately, and the 4th episode is where it happens. Tony dreams he's in Melfi's office, and everybody's there. Hesh, AJ, Silvio, Paulie, Pussy, and Jackie Aprile, who's dying at the time, and sitting there smoking and saying something about rain. Paulie and Pussy are reading newspapers in Chinese. Nobody finds any of this strange, which is the part to register, because it's how the show handles dreams for the next 6 years. The room looks like the room, the people look like the people, and then things quietly stop obeying the rules, and there's no moment where anybody turns to camera and tells you you've crossed over. Then Melfi turns into Livia. There are images in this series you could argue about for 20 years, and that one isn't especially interested in hiding. The 2 women occupying the most dangerous positions in his life become the same woman. But the thing underneath it matters as much, which is that the room doesn't hold. Tony's built himself exactly one artificial compartment, Once or twice a week, he drives to a suburban office and behaves as though everything outside it can stay outside it, and his own head fills it with everybody he knows inside about 90 seconds. And over the following 7 years, that's what happens. His mother gets in there, and his father, and the marriage, and the children, and the money, and the panic, and the murders, and eventually the dead. What he was afraid of was contamination. What he got was a room where the contamination gets processed, and then he goes back outside. Hold on to the office, because one of the last significant dreams in the series puts him back in the same chair, and by then he's carrying something considerably worse than Hesh. 2 episodes after that, there's another one, and it does something formally that I think is genuinely bold for 1999. Tony's having sex with Irina, then Irina is Melfi, with no transition and no explanation. Then he appears to wake up, with Carmela next to him, and he gets out of bed and goes into the bathroom, and Melfi's in there, and only after that does he actually wake up. That's a false awakening, 6 episodes into the show's existence, dropped in without comment, and what it tells you is that waking up is not evidence that reality has resumed. It's a piece of grammar the series will use again in Funhouse and again in the test dream, and it works because that's genuinely how it happens to people. You surface, you're sure you're out, you aren't. It also establishes the other habit, which is that people turn into other people and the dream never stops to explain itself. Irina becomes Melfi, Melfi becomes Livia. Later on, Melfi merges with Annalisa, Gloria turns into Svetlana, and Meadow's boyfriend keeps sliding into AJ. Nobody in any of these ever says, hold on, that's somebody else. Because awake, Tony runs on categories: wife, Gumar, mother, doctor, son, employee, boss, problem. And the sleeping version has no use for a legal identity. It files people by what they do to him. The woman who takes care of him, the one who withholds, the young man who disappoints, and what he does with the Irina dream is tell her about it. He goes into a session and says he's been dreaming about her and thinks he's in love with her, which he did not have to do, and Melfi does the professional thing and calls it transference. She gives it a name, and the name is a container, and the whole problem goes into the container. That's the arrangement in miniature, 6 episodes in. Something surfaces he can't file. He carries it to the office. It comes back with a label on it. There's a smaller one in the first season finale that's easy to lose, because the episode has a great deal else going on. It's the one where he's made to sit and listen to the FBI recordings of what Junior and his mother have been saying about him. Melfi asks whether he's been dreaming. He says no, then admits he has, about Jeannie Cusimano sexually. She starts asking about it, and he gives her a bit of it, including a description of Jeannie's body that doesn't especially match Jeannie, and then decides they've got more important things to be discussing. Which is a tiny version of what he does with therapy for the next 7 years. He's perfectly willing to put unconscious material on the table right up until somebody wants to stay with it longer than he does, and look at what's around it. The waking subject that week is his mother helping to arrange his murder, and what he offers the room is a sex dream about the neighbor. I don't think that means Jeannie secretly equals Livia. What it means is that sex is one of the exits his mind reaches for when the material gets close to something he can't hold, and Melfi understands that a very long time before he does. Tony isn't the only one whose sleeping mind refuses to leave a murder where his waking mind put it, though, and the first proper full dream the show gives anybody else belongs to Christopher. Emile Kolar is the first murder we watch Christopher commit, shot in the back room at Satrial's, and what's interesting is what Christopher does with it afterward, which is file it as a career achievement. He's angry about his standing. He thinks he's doing the work and taking the risks. He's killed a man and he still isn't made. The waking version of Emile's death is basically a line on a resume, and the complaint attached to it is, "Where's my reward?" Then Emile starts coming back. The dream puts him at Satrial's, which drags the murder back through the room it happened in, and the meat, and the business, and Emile talks. He tells Christopher that Christopher killed him, and that he screwed it up, and he points him toward the evidence they didn't clear up properly. So it isn't only guilt, and I'd be overselling it if I told you it was. It's guilt with a practical fear folded into it. The dead man bothers him, and the dead man might also still be able to hurt him legally, and both of those are running at once. But his waking mind turned a murder into a promotion he was owed, and his sleeping mind keeps turning it back into a person and a problem. And it isn't one night. Christopher tells Paulie he's getting them constantly. Paulie's answer is one of those lines that gets stranger the longer the series runs. He tells Christopher this is what happens, and that the more people you kill, the better you'll sleep, and then he admits that after one of his own, the man chased him through his dreams for months. Which means Paulie's relationship with being haunted doesn't start when Christopher comes back from the hospital talking about hell. He already knows exactly what it is to murder somebody and then fail to keep them out of his sleep, and his solution is repetition. Do enough of it and you'll get used to it. That's the advice, delivered warmly, from an older man to a younger one, and it tells you an enormous amount about this world. The psychological damage isn't evidence that anything's wrong, it's a rookie phase you're expected to grow out of, and Christopher mostly does. Pussy ends up at the center of all this eventually, but before Tony ever kills him, Pussy gets his own version of it, and it's in the Italy episode in the second season. He's already working with the FBI by then, and he meets his handler, and an Elvis impersonator called Jimmy Bones sees the two of them together. Jimmy may not know what he saw. Pussy can't afford the question either way, so he goes round to Jimmy's house and kills him with a hammer. Problem solved. Then he falls asleep and starts threatening Jimmy out loud in bed, and Angie has to wake him up. That one's easy to miss, because Pussy isn't a character the show otherwise treats as having much of an interior. Put it next to Christopher and the pattern turns up on its own. Christopher kills Emil, and Emil comes back. Pussy kills Jimmy, and Jimmy comes back. Silvio helps kill Pussy, and Pussy comes back. Paulie helps kill Pussy, and Pussy comes back to him too. Tony kills Pussy, and Pussy essentially takes up residence. The waking logic in this world is that dead means handled. The sleeping logic keeps declining to agree. And in that same Italy episode, Tony's doing something completely different with the same equipment, because he meets Annalisa, who's running an organization, and is smart and formidable in a way he isn't used to seeing from a woman, and he has a brief fantasy about her in a ludicrous ancient Roman setting, which I'd normally leave out. Except that Annalisa gets folded into Melfi later, inside a dream, which tells you the sleeping mind isn't inventing everything from nothing. The show plants the fantasy first, and the dream recycles it. That's part of why I don't think these things work as a code. They work more like storage. The series keeps putting material into this man, people, films, sex, food, dead friends, old songs, his parents, and then when he sleeps, all of it's available at once. Which is also why the animals keep turning up. The ducks, the bird that takes his penis, Pussy is a fish, Pussy in a rat trap, Pio my wandering through the living room, Melfi's Rottweiler, Christopher's raven, and at the very end, a cat that won't stop looking at a photograph. I'm not going to build a dictionary out of that, because duck equals family, and fish equals betrayal, and dog equals revenge is exactly the kind of reading that makes this material less interesting than it is. But the broader pattern's worth naming once and then leaving alone, and it's this. Animals turn up when these people run into something the social machinery can't process. Tony knows what to do with a man. He can pay him, threaten him, promote him, lie to him, or kill him. A duck leaving his pool is outside all of that. So is a horse that gets sick. So is a bird at a window during a ceremony. And so is a cat that keeps staring at a dead man's face because Paulie finds it upsetting. Animals sit outside the entire system of leverage these men understand, and the unconscious seems to find them useful for exactly that reason. There's one tiny Tony dream in Big Girls Don't Cry that belongs here because it makes the office itself visible by taking the office away. Melfi still isn't treating him, so Tony tries to use Hesh as a substitute therapist. He starts telling him about a dream in which he's on a beach wearing a suit and shoes. That's about as far as he gets. Hesh immediately starts bringing up his own medical worries, and Tony has to stop and ask whether he even wants to hear the dream. It's funny because Hesh is intelligent, older, trusted, and knows Tony's world in ways Melfi never will. And he's terrible at this. The scene is tiny, but it makes a useful distinction. Tony doesn't only need somebody smart enough to have an opinion about him, he needs somebody whose role is to keep listening when the material gets strange, repetitive, embarrassing, or uncomfortable. Hesh turns the conversation back toward himself almost immediately. Melfi can't do that every time Tony becomes difficult, because listening to him is the arrangement. That matters for the room. Tony's unconscious can produce material anywhere. What the office gives him is a place where the material can stay on the table long enough to be examined. Melfi isn't interchangeable with any intelligent older person he trusts. Part of why the therapy room works is much simpler than interpretation. Somebody in it is being paid to keep listening, which brings us to Silvio, and one of the funniest dreams in the show. For a while I had this one filed as Silvio's mind working out that Pussy was a rat, and that isn't what's happening at all, because Pussy's already dead. Silvio was on the boat, he helped kill him, the betrayal is known, and the punishment already happened. What sets it off is Pussy's old Santa suit turning up, and that night Silvio dreams somebody's stealing his cheese, and goes to find out who, and it's Pussy, caught in an enormous rat trap. Rat, informant, fine. You don't need Young for that part. What's more interesting is what he does when he wakes up, which is go and find Tony and tell him that ever since the suit turned up, he's been dreaming about pussy. And what's eating him isn't whether killing him was right, it's how he missed it. How long it had been going on when it started, how he could have been standing next to the man for years and not seen it. That's the part still alive. Killing pussy solved pussy, and it didn't do a thing about Silvio's failure to see him. And Silvio's probably the right place to put the limit on all of this, because dream analysis might be the single easiest thing in this show to overread. You can find somebody explaining every animal, color, number, item of clothing, song, and object in the corner of the frame. Some of that's genuinely interesting, and a fair amount of it is nonsense. The correct answer isn't that the dreams mean nothing either, though. They're constructed. Somebody chose the cheese, and somebody chose the rat trap, and somebody chose which dead friend was in it. Constructed isn't the same as coded, and there's no authorized sentence somewhere that says cheese equals X. So I'm not going to solve every object. I'm interested in what these things keep doing, and there's no episode where the machinery is clearer than Funhouse. It gets remembered for about 90 seconds of itself. Big Pussy as a fish on ice talking, but the fish arrives near the end of a long process. Tony gets violently sick and spends a huge stretch of that episode sweating and vomiting and sleeping and surfacing and going back under, and the show gives him 6 dream sequences in total. The fish is the 5th. The happy family dinner afterward is the 6th. These aren't random interruptions arranged around one important scene. They're a progression, and Tony's mind spends half an episode working its way toward a conclusion it already has the material for. The first one already has him asking where pussy is. He's dealing with illness and death in it, and at one point he moves towards setting himself on fire, and in the middle of all that the question's already there, and the man is already missing. Another one uses Silvio doing the line from the third Godfather film about the true enemy not having revealed himself, and then Tony shoots Paulie. The wrong man entirely, which is funny and is also the machinery working. He knows there's a betrayal somewhere, and his mind is testing the wrong candidate. Another jams Christopher and Adriana and Furio into a tiny car while Tony again is looking for pussy. Another puts him back in Melfi's office, and the sexual material floods in, and the man's name starts collapsing into the other meaning of the word, and the old penis and bird dream gets pulled back into the same space, and Annalisa and Melfi blur into each other. Sex and betrayal and the ducks all end up in one file, and then he gets to the fish market, and Pussy's lying on the ice, and the fish tells him he's been working with the government. It's absurd and it's funny, and it's one of the most consequential moments in the series, because Tony wakes up and acts. He goes to the house, fakes being sick to get himself upstairs alone, searches the bedroom, and finds the wire. So the dream produces action, and I want that on the table early rather than defending a tidier claim later. These things do things. Tony gets up because of one. Carmela will move toward investigating Adriana because of hers. Melfi will make one of the most important ethical decisions in the series after hers. Little Carmine will build a life around one. The question was never whether a dream can cause action. It's what kind and what the person's prepared to lose once it's made something harder to ignore. Because Tony didn't learn Pussy was an informant from a fish, he knew. Maybe not in the sense of having signed his name under it, but Polly had already reported that Pussy wouldn't take a steam and wouldn't get undressed, and had a story about his back that didn't hold up. And Tony had already put his hands on the man in a basement under cover of a hug to feel for a wire. The evidence had been arriving for a year, and he'd been finding somewhere else to put every piece of it, because not knowing something you already suspect is work. Coincidence, bad timing, back pain, a mood, a misunderstanding. Anything that keeps the conclusion from becoming official. He's spectacularly good at that, and then his own head turns his friend into a fish and says it plainly, and the whole arrangement comes down. Chase has talked about the narrative problem underneath this, which is that the alternative was a procedural. Tony following Pussy, gathering evidence, reasoning his way to certainty like a detective, and that isn't the show. The dream carries him somewhere the story had already spent a season preparing him to go, so the fish isn't intelligence. The fish is the moment denial stops being affordable. And I don't want to make that sound cheap, because Pussy matters to him. This is decades of friendship. And the boat is one of the saddest things in the series precisely because for a few minutes, everyone aboard is almost allowed to behave like old friends again. He's losing something real. He isn't surrendering himself. The dream told him the structure was threatened and he removed the threat, and the thing he paid with was Pussy. Then the episode gives him the 6th one, which is the one people forget because the fish has already done the plot work. Tony imagines a family dinner. Everybody's together, everything's fine, the family's intact. So the sequence runs from illness and death, through the wrong suspect, through identity coming apart, through sex and confusion, to the truth, and then out the other side into the image he's been protecting since the ducks. I don't think you reduce that to Tony killing Pussy for his family. It's more that both pictures sit inside him without any friction at all. Pussy has to die, and my family is safe, and in there the second one may well be holding the door for the first. Once Pussy's dead, the whole category gets stranger, because he doesn't stay inside dreams. Livia dies at the top of the third season, and afterward the house is full of people, and Tony opens a cabinet with a mirror in it, and for a moment Pussy is standing behind him. Then he isn't. Tony doesn't shout. He doesn't turn around and have a conversation with the ghost. Nobody else reacts, and the show never explains it. And the formal choice is the thing. Tony doesn't later tell somebody he thought he saw Pussy. We see him. The camera hands him to us directly, which creates a problem the series never bothers to solve. If Tony dreams about Pussy, that's easy to file. He's asleep, his mind made a fish. If Pussy turns up in a mirror while he's awake and we can see him too, what exactly are we looking at? A flash of guilt, a hallucination, Tony's subjective perception presented objectively, an actual ghost. The show doesn't choose, and it's going to do the same thing again years later with Paulie. It happens almost immediately afterward with Christopher too, in the episode where he's made, which is supposed to be the biggest day of his life, and is solemn by the standards of these men, and is the thing he's wanted for years. And there's a bird at the window. A raven. He can't stop looking at it, and afterward he's convinced it was an omen, and Adriana tells him it was probably just a bird, and he doesn't believe her, and when things start going wrong, he comes back to it. Maybe it means nothing, and a bird landed outside a building. That's the rational reading, and it's available. But this is a man who's already been dreaming about somebody he murdered for years, and who died on an operating table the previous season and came back convinced he'd been to hell. The thing he wanted most in the world arrived with an omen attached, and the show knows exactly what he's going to do with that. And the near-death experience is where this gets much harder to wave off. Christopher gets shot, dies on the table, and comes back. What he reports isn't a vague business about a light. He says he went somewhere, and that hell is an Irish bar where it's St. Patrick's Day forever, and that people he knows are in there. And he brings a message back for Tony and Paulie. 3 o'clock. Tony's reaction is instant. Drugs, trauma, a dream, a brain doing strange things while a body is nearly dead. Paulie believes him, or believes enough of it that he can't put it down, and that split runs for the rest of the series. Tony's instinct when something uncanny happens is to pull it back into psychology, and Paulie's is to ask what the message means. Tony asks which part of you produced this. Paulie asks who sent it. The show spends 6 seasons declining to tell us which of them is making the bigger mistake. Paulie starts having nightmares about being dragged down there. He becomes fixated on damnation and starts trying to calculate how long he'd have to spend in purgatory based on the number of sins involved, as though the afterlife runs on a points system and he's located the loophole. Which is very Paulie, because his religion was never really about moral change. It's an account. He's donated money and paid for masses and given to the church, and he believes an arrangement exists. Then Christopher comes back from the dead and more or less tells him the arrangement might not. So he goes to a psychic, awake, in a normal room on a normal afternoon. And the psychic starts talking about the dead people around him and names them and knows details, and Paulie ends up shouting at him. The series never supplies a mundane on-screen explanation for how the psychic knows those details. The information simply exists. Paulie throws a chair, insults the spirits, and leaves. And then he goes after the priest, which is the part that tells you what kind of fright this is, because his response to possibly discovering that his entire spiritual accounting system is fake is not that he might want to stop killing people. It's what the hell have I been paying you for? The fear is sincere, though. That's what I don't want to lose about him. He isn't performing it. Christopher's story stays with him, and the psychic stays with him, and hell stays with him, and years later the Virgin Mary is going to stay with him too, and none of it produces the obvious conclusion. He remains Paulie. Melfi is the case that runs the other way, and her dreams about Tony arrive in an order that tells you nearly as much as the dreams do. The first is early in the second season, after she stopped treating him. She dreams he's driving in heavy rain and can't see the road, and he starts panicking, and he reaches for his Prozac, and the bottle's empty, and he passes out at the wheel and crashes. All the while, music from The Wizard of Oz is playing. She wakes up and writes it down, which is about as Melfi as anything in the series. Tony wakes from a dream and complains about it. She wakes from one and takes notes. It gets more interesting when she takes it to Elliot. Her own first reading is about responsibility. She abandoned him as a patient, and in the dream he can't see where he's going, and he reaches for the medication attached to her treatment, and there's nothing there, and he goes off the road. Some part of her is frightened about what happens to him without her, and that fear becomes part of what carries her back toward treating him again. Except Elliot doesn't stop at the interpretation she'd prefer. He picks up The Wizard of Oz, asks who Tony would be in it, and Melfi initially says Oz himself. The conversation moves through her childhood fear of the film and toward the possibility that Tony is giving her something too. Danger, excitement, a safe relationship with a world she'd never go anywhere near otherwise. A vicarious thrill in treating a gangster. And she gets angry, properly angry, which matters because it stops her from being the clean answer to Tony. She can resist an interpretation too. She can dislike what somebody else sees in her and go after the person holding it. She's better at this than he is, and she isn't exempt from the mechanism. Then the second one, in the third season, after the worst thing that happens to her. She's raped in a parking garage, the man's arrested and then released because the evidence gets mishandled, and later she sees his photograph up at his workplace. Employee of the month. The legal system has failed so completely that the episode is more or less daring you to want Tony Soprano because she has access to something the police don't. She knows a man who could make Rossi disappear with no paperwork and no appeal and no technicality, and it would take one sentence, and part of her wants it. That's what the dream does. She's at a vending machine, and her hand gets trapped. There's a Rottweiler, and at first the dog frightens her, and then Rossi appears and the dog goes for him. Later, with Elliot, she works out what the dog is. It's Tony, and that's more interesting than Tony is dangerous, which she's known for years. The dream is showing her the usefulness of the danger, that the thing that makes him frightening is the same thing that could make him protective. The dog isn't safe. That's why the dog works. She understands the implication completely. She could tell him what happened, and he'd understand exactly what she wanted without her ever having to ask for it, and Rossi would probably be dead before her next session. And she says out loud that there's a satisfaction just in knowing the option is sitting there. Then Tony gives her the opening. He can tell something's happened. He asks if she wants to tell him about it. She says no. That's the cleanest dream-to-choice sequence in the series, and Chase has discussed the ending of that episode in terms of Melfi making an ethical choice rather than the show handing the audience a revenge mechanism. She understands what she wants. The dream made the desire impossible to deny. And then she decided that understanding a desire doesn't oblige you to obey it, which is the distinction Tony fails to make for 6 seasons. Years later, she has a third one, and this time the unconscious finally makes it sexual. That isn't the show revealing a hidden love story. She later tells Elliot she did once find him attractive. The danger, the alpha male thing, the charisma, and that year after year the ugliness of what she was hearing wore it away. And the waking test arrives almost immediately, because Tony starts actually pursuing her. Flowers, invitations, declarations. He kisses her. She refuses him. He keeps going. She refuses him again, and eventually he demands to know why. And she tells him the values, the dishonesty, the disrespect, the violence, the fact that he takes what he wants from people by force or the threat of it. He storms out. So her dream history with him has now moved through 3 roles: responsibility, then a weapon, then desire. Her unconscious can make him into all 3, and every time, the waking Melfi has to decide what the feeling permits. She resumes treating him after feeling responsible. She refuses to use him. She refuses him after admitting the attraction. Junior gives you an uglier version of the same machinery, and it isn't even a dream. He's going into cancer surgery. He's frightened, and his survival has stopped being theoretical, and under the anesthetic, the FBI turns up and offers him a guaranteed cure if he gives them Tony, which is a remarkably specific temptation for that mind to build, because his entire identity runs on the opposite. Old school, loyal, never a rat, a man for whom informing is beneath contempt, and the anesthetized version of him immediately constructs the one price that might actually test it. Not money, not less time inside, not comfort. The cancer gone, it doesn't reveal that Junior secretly intends to inform. It reveals that the category exists in him, and that even he has a price his own mind can picture. Gloria is where you can watch him repeat something he's already understood. She reaches him because so much of her machinery is familiar. The volatility, the need, the punishment, the threats of leaving, the ability to turn affection into cruelty without much warning. He spent years in that office discussing his mother, and then he starts sleeping with a woman who can produce the same feeling in him, and Melfi can see it happening well before he can. Then the relationship collapses, and Gloria hangs herself, and he finds out from somebody else. His reaction's complicated, and I don't think it helps to pretend otherwise. He's guilty, actually guilty. The feeling is real. What he's bad at is letting a real feeling produce the corresponding change, so instead he starts making payments somewhere else. Generosity in odd directions, concern for people he wouldn't normally think about, gestures. Trying to put something good on the other side of a ledger he'd never describe out loud. Then she comes back in a dream. She's in black, and there's a long scarf which, given how she died, you can't really unsee, and she's sitting at a table in an ordinary domestic scene, being folded into the kind of evening she never got while she was alive. Which is worth noticing as its own pattern, because the dead in this show almost never behave like ghosts. They don't arrive screaming, they don't accuse anybody, they don't decay, they don't hover at the foot of the bed. Pussy cooks. Gloria eats. Carmine has a birthday party. Adriana walks through a house. They stay embedded in ordinary life, and I find that considerably creepier than blood would be, because death hasn't turned them into monsters. It's just failed to make them absent. The dream doesn't transform him. What it feeds is the guilt that's already moving, and he does the thing he does. A good act somewhere, a gift, some concern for somebody, something that lets him feel the balance has shifted slightly. A payment made in the wrong currency into the wrong account. Season 4 makes that explicit, because calling all cars gives him 2 dreams, and the order is the entire point. The first one's in his father's old Cadillac, Carmela's driving, Tony's in the back, Gloria's there, and then Gloria's Svetlana. Ralph's in it too, with a caterpillar on his head that eventually turns into a butterfly. The car's uncomfortable, and it never seems to arrive anywhere. And this is the one he takes to Melfi. This is the dream they actually discuss. Which matters, because he makes the connection himself. Riding around, going nowhere, 4 years of this. Talking, interpreting, maybe this means that, and maybe that means something else. He's sick of it. He wants the dream to behave like the fish. Give him the answer, let him act. Melfi doesn't work that way. She keeps asking what he thinks, what the car means to him, what his father's car means, what it means that Carmela's driving it, what Gloria's doing there, and he gets more and more contemptuous of the whole process, because ambiguity infuriates him. He can tolerate it fine when he's the one using it on somebody else. He can't stand owning it, so he quits, and only then does the show give him the second dream. He's in Miami. He follows Ralph toward an old house, except he doesn't look like Tony Soprano anymore. He's dressed as an immigrant laborer from an earlier generation, an old-world workman, speaking differently, and he says he's come to do masonry. The boss is gone. The mansion's gone, the suits are gone, the title's gone, and what's left is something older. Family, labor, where the people came from. He goes toward the house. There's a shadowed woman inside, never clearly identified, and the association with Livia is hard to avoid. He opens the door and starts going in, and wakes up terrified. He does not take that dream to Melfi. He can't. He's already left, which makes the whole sequence better than I'd understood it. The episode first hands him a dream he can discuss, and he rejects the process of discussing it, and then it hands him the one he'd most obviously need help with, and the room is shut. The other detail I like is that the episode is openly arguing about this while it happens. Melfi brings up Freud and the idea that dreams express wishes. Tony complains about the whole maybe this, maybe that business. The hour is having a debate about whether dreams can be interpreted at all while producing one of the least interpretable dreams in the series. And the house matters later, because 2 seasons on, after Junior shoots him, the show builds another one. Warm light, people inside, a maternal presence somewhere in there, Tony at the threshold again. The 2 aren't identical though, and the difference is the good part. In Miami, something seems to pull him inward and he wakes up frightened. In the coma, he's invited in and there's a condition attached. We'll get to the briefcase. But the mother inside those houses isn't the only one his mind builds, and the clearest case is a year earlier. Late in the first season, Tony's in one of his worst stretches. Melfi's put him on lithium. He's sleeping constantly, and he's moving around his own house like a man underwater. Then he sees a woman staying at the Cusimano's place. Isabella. Italian, a dental student from Avellino, which is where his own family came from. She's warm with him. She's patient. She's interested. She feeds him and she listens and she doesn't want anything from him. At one point, the whole thing shifts into an old Italian setting and she's holding a baby and nursing him, and the baby's name is Antonio. Then it turns out nobody was staying there. Whatever combination of depression and medication and his own head produced her, she wasn't real. And when Melfi works through it, the maternal function isn't buried at all. Isabella is the protective, nurturing mother he never got. Which is why calling her a lithium side effect misses the interesting half. The medication might explain why he hallucinated. It doesn't explain what the hallucination was of. Why that woman? Why Avelino? Why nursing? Why Antonio? Why a mother who asks for nothing? And the timing is the thing that gets me. While his mind is building this woman, his actual mother is involved in a plot that's moving toward getting him killed. His waking world is closing in on proof that Livia would trade him. His hallucinating mind produces a woman who'd hold him as a baby. Not because he's failed to understand what his mother is. Because he understands the absence extremely well, he finds out she isn't real. He comes off the lithium. And shortly after that, the FBI tapes force him to confront what Livia and Junior were actually doing, so I wouldn't say nothing changes. Things change enormously. He's pushed into knowledge he can't refuse. What doesn't happen is any emotional resolution. Knowing your mother helped arrange your death doesn't do anything about the need that produced Isabella in the first place, and that need keeps finding new forms for the rest of the series. Melfi turning into Livia. Isabella, the woman on the stairs in Miami, the presence in the house at the end of the coma, and no episode puts more of his attachments in one place than the test dream. By season 5, the show's confident enough to spend roughly 20 minutes of an episode inside an extended dream, which is an absurd proportion of a television hour to hand over to something that isn't happening. It isn't a quick nightmare or one strange image, it's a whole movement. He falls asleep, and the separation between every category of his life comes off. Dead Carmen's there, Johnny Boy's there, Gloria, Pussy, Mikey Palmas, Ralph, Richie, Gigi, Artie, Charmaine, Carmela. Pyomai wanders through the living room like a house guest. His teeth fall out. The dream vestiges material from The Godfather. Lee Harvey Oswald shoots at him. A crowd chases him. Finn's parents turn out to be Vin Makazian and Annette Bening. Finn himself keeps sliding toward AJ, and his cousin attacks Phil Leotardo, none of which the dream treats as requiring explanation. You could spend an hour on any 3 of those images, and I'm not going to, because the useful thing isn't what each piece means. It's what happens to his filing system. It disappears. Awake, everything is separated. His father is therapy material. The dead men are business. Pyomai is grief he'd never call grief. Carmela is the marriage. Finn is his daughter's boyfriend and a mild irritation. AJ is his son. Tony B is family or business depending on the hour. The Godfather is a film these men quote at each other. Coach Molinaro is high school. None of those are supposed to share a room. Then he falls asleep, and all of them do. That's why the sequence is exhausting to watch. It isn't one message. It's the sight of every wall he maintains coming down simultaneously, and how much work those walls have evidently been. Even the movies get in, because his mind is partly made of them. Melfi's first dream had already done a quieter version of the same thing from the other side. The Wizard of Oz plays through Tony's crash, and her childhood fear of the film becomes part of the conversation about why treating him thrills and frightens her. Dreams and films work through the same kind of free association. You can be somewhere else instantly, without a transition, and Chase has drawn that comparison himself, and these men have spent their whole lives using movies to explain themselves. Silvio does the impressions. Christopher wants to make them. Their idea of what a gangster is has been shaped by watching gangsters. So when Tony dreams, nothing in there distinguishes between something that happened to him and something he watched happen to somebody in a film. Both are available material, which is probably closer to how memory actually behaves anyway, and then the dream arrives at Coach Molinaro. Except this isn't the first one. When he wakes up, he talks about it in a way that suggests Coach Molinaro dreams are an existing category, one Carmela recognizes, which means he's been going back to this man in his sleep for years before we were ever shown it. Being unprepared is a recurring appointment. So the coach isn't a symbol invented for that night's crisis. He's a standing internal judge, and what he says is brutal. Tony had ability, intelligence, leadership. He could have done something else. Tony starts defending his life immediately, and the defense is a list. He's successful, he has a house, he has a family, people listen to him, he's a leader, which is what he always does when the conversation gets near the possibility that the life itself was the wrong choice. He turns his existence into an inventory. Look what I've got. Look what I built. Look who answers to me. Then Molinaro goes after the therapy too. Tony mentions he sees a psychologist, and the coach suggests he's got her wrapped around his finger as well, and Tony, without appearing to notice how it sounds, more or less agrees that manipulating people was always one of the things he was good at, which is extraordinary, because the dream is asking the question this entire video is asking. Is the therapy examining Tony, or did Tony learn to manage the examiner? And the coach is inside a room Tony didn't build, so he can't end the conversation the way he'd normally end it. So he reaches for the other solution. The gun doesn't work. He tries to shoot Molinaro, and the weapon fails, and the coach keeps talking. That's the simplest image in 20 minutes of dream, and it's the one I'd keep if I could only keep one. Violence solves nearly every serious problem in his waking world. It has no purchase whatsoever on the sentence you could have been someone else. He can kill a witness, a friend, an enemy, a cousin. He cannot shoot the life he didn't live, and Molinaro keeps at him. You're not prepared. You took the easy way out. Tony objects to that, and he's right to, because being Tony Soprano is not easy. People try to kill him, the government follows him around, his friends inform on him, his family conspires against him, he watches people die and lives under constant threat. But that isn't what the coach means by easy. Danger and courage aren't the same thing, and it's perfectly possible to choose a brutally difficult life while also choosing the path that required the least separation from the identity you were handed. His father, his neighborhood, his crew, the version of manhood he inherited. The structure was already standing there waiting for him. The harder road was the one where he'd have had to leave it, which is going to matter enormously when we get to Little Carmine, because Little Carmine does the one thing Tony can barely conceive of, which is let a room full of men think less of him. There's one more thing in that dream I'm not going to explain away. Inside it, Tony sees his cousin attack Phil, and shortly after he wakes, Christopher tells him Tony B has killed Billy Leotardo and wounded Phil. You can build the rational account, and it's a decent one. He already knows how unstable the situation is. He knows what his cousin is capable of. He knows revenge is building, and his sleeping mind runs the likeliest outcome. That's fear being accurate rather than anything stranger. The show doesn't offer you that. It just lets the dream arrive at the violence before the waking man gets the news and moves on. And by this stage, the series has done this often enough that the question won't quite go away. Christopher says he went to hell. The psychic knows the names. Pussy turns up in a mirror. A dream gets somewhere before the phone call does. Polly is going to see the Virgin Mary in a strip club. Every one of those has an ordinary explanation available, and the show keeps making sure the explanation never fully closes. But strip all of that out. Insist every dream in this series comes entirely from the person having it, and the test dream still does something enormous because it gets him to the problem he's been avoiding. His cousin. The man whose situation is becoming impossible, where New York is going to demand a response and his own feelings are wrecking his judgment, and there's no outcome where everybody survives it. The title's literal. It's a test, and he's unprepared. Which leaves the real question, and it's the one the second half of this is about. What happens when the dream stops telling him somebody else has to go? Carmela is where it gets uncomfortable, because her dreams genuinely move her toward the truth. And before Adriana starts turning up in them, she's already been using fantasy for something else entirely, which is an exit. By the end of the 4th season, in the fight where the marriage finally comes apart, she tells Tony about Furio, that she'd been dreaming about him, fantasizing about him, in love with him, which is worth having in a video like this, because not every dream in the show drags somebody backward into guilt. Some of them build another life. Furio is a version of marriage she can picture and doesn't have, a man who looks at her differently and pays attention differently, a household that might not require all the arrangements she's made. And she doesn't need a psychiatrist to tell her what it means. She knows exactly what it means. The problem isn't insight. The problem is that Furio leaves, and the other life disappears before she ever has to discover whether she'd have taken it, which is worth holding when Adriana starts appearing, because Adriana's relationship to escape was a great deal less theoretical. Carmela dreams about her twice after she disappears, and the first thing to get straight is what Carmela consciously knows, which is what she's been told, that Adriana ran off, left Christopher, went to New York or somewhere, and the details don't matter because the story was built not to be inspected. She accepts it in the way she accepts a lot of things. She hasn't got proof of anything else, but accepting the official version isn't the same as being comfortable with it. She's been married into this for 20 years. People vanish and stop being mentioned, and questions have consequences. She doesn't know Silvio drove that girl into the woods. Somewhere in her, the story about the packed bag has never settled properly. Then Adriana walks into the spec house. Carmela calls it a nightmare, which is interesting, because nothing conventionally horrifying happens in it. Adriana isn't decomposing, and there's no blood, and she doesn't accuse anybody. She's just there, inside the unfinished house. That's enough. And the placement is brutal, because the spec house is one of Carmela's rewards. Not in the crude sense of Tony handing her a building as payment. The marriage is more complicated than that, but the project is part of what allows the marriage to keep running. Money, property, something that's hers, something she can build, a version of independence that doesn't require her to actually separate from the thing funding it, and her own head walks a murdered girl through it. The connection had already been made for us, incidentally, before Carmela ever dreams it. The end of long-term parking gives you woodland that reads at first as the place where Adriana was killed, and then the camera reveals it's a different piece of land, Carmela's property. The show puts the murder and the building site into the same visual sentence, and then, seasons later, Carmela's unconscious finishes the connection without knowing anybody made it. There's a small thing around that dream I like as well, because of how casually it's done. She and Tony are eating sushi, and she tells him she's started fantasizing about the restaurant when they aren't even there. It's this little luxury they've begun treating as normal. And Tony makes a joke about it. And then she says she had a nightmare about Adriana. The good thing and the dead girl keep ending up beside each other. That's the pattern. Adriana doesn't turn up when Carmela's being punished. She turns up inside the things Carmela gets to enjoy, then Paris. She goes with Rosalie, and the whole stretch is unusually reflective for her. She's standing in a city layered with people who lived and died and vanished and left almost nothing behind, and she can't stop thinking about it. And Rosalie is considerably less interested in spending a holiday on mortality, which is fair enough. And Adriana turns up in that too, with Cosette, not as a horror ghost, just Adriana, present normal, and somebody in the dream says that someone needs to tell her she's dead. So the first dream gives Carmela a presence, and the second one gives her a word. And when she wakes up, she moves. That's the part I'd underplayed for a long time. The dream works. She comes home and starts pushing. She asks about Adriana. She won't take Tony's dismissal of it. She goes and sees Liz LaServa, who is not doing well and who believes something terrible happened to her daughter, and she starts talking seriously about finding out. She gets as far as a private investigator's number and holds on to it. Then the spec house gets stuck. Construction problems, permits, a stop work order, the kind of bureaucratic mess she can't solve on her own. Tony can. Tony makes it go away. The house starts moving again. The investigation doesn't. The card goes. And I don't want to make that more explicit than the show does, because Carmela never sits down and thinks Tony fixed my house, so I'll stop asking whether his people murdered Adriana. That isn't how complicity works here. The plot makes the transaction on her behalf. The thing she wants starts moving, and the question she was asking stops, and nobody ever has to name what was exchanged, which brings us to Adriana, and one of the cruelest things the show ever does. Long-term parking lets us believe she got out. For a few seconds, she's driving alone with the suitcase beside her and the road ahead of her, and because the series has spent years making us want that for her, we take it immediately. Then it cuts back, and she isn't driving. She's in the passenger seat, and Silvio's driving, and she's already on the way to the woods. The escape is happening inside her head, while the actual car carries her toward being shot, which makes her fantasy different from nearly everything else in this video. Tony dreams backward almost every time. Dead friends, parents, old teachers, things he already knows. Carmela's dreams pull a buried suspicion up toward the surface. Adriana imagines forward. Another road, another life, a future. And for those few seconds, the show hands the future to us as well, which is what makes the cut land. The fantasy isn't only hers. We wanted it too, and the episode gives us the version we wanted and then takes it off us. Drea de Matteo has talked about escape material being filmed while the production protected the secret of what actually happens to her, and some of that footage ends up serving the fantasy, which almost makes it worse because somewhere there genuinely exists film of Adriana driving away, and the episode chose to put that possibility inside the last minutes of a story where she doesn't. And unlike almost everybody here, she actually tried. She was working with the FBI because she was terrified and cornered, and then she told Christopher the truth and offered him the way out with her. Witness protection, another place, another life. She knew what telling him might cost, and she told him anyway, which is one of the largest risks anybody in this series voluntarily takes. He doesn't kill her himself, and that distinction matters. He gives her up. Tony arranges the rest. Silvio drives her out and shoots her. The man she trusted chose the life they already had over the one she was offering, and she paid for both of them. She tried and lost everything. Everybody else in this video wakes up. Paulie spends the whole series frightened that one day he won't, and Paulie is where the line between a dream and a religion and an actual haunting becomes impossible to keep straight. The groundwork is Christopher's hospital bed and the message he brought back. Tony dismisses it. Paulie can't, and he starts waking up at night, thinking about hell, doing his purgatory arithmetic, going to the psychic, and getting names he has no comfortable explanation for. Years pass, and he goes on being Paulie. Then the ride brings the old warning back, because he's waiting on medical results. Prostate trouble, cancer fear, And mortality has become immediate again, and he can't sleep, and the episode makes a point of the clock at 3 in the morning. 3 o'clock. The thing Christopher carried back from wherever he believes he went. And later, he's at the Bing, empty and dark, and he looks across the room, and the Virgin Mary is standing there. And the formal choice is the same one the show made with Pussy in the mirror, which is that we see her. The episode doesn't show Polly reacting to empty space and have him describe it afterward. She's placed in the frame, for us, for a moment. Then he reacts. Maybe that's subjective, and we're being shown his perception. Television can do that. But this series keeps choosing a way of presenting these things that refuses to put quotation marks around them. I don't think we're being asked to become Polly, or to conclude that Catholic cosmology is objectively operating inside the show. It's doing something more irritating than that. It keeps declining to let Tony's explanation close the case. Then in Remember, when the sleeping and waking threats finally line up. He's on the road with Tony, and Tony is seriously weighing up whether Polly has become too dangerous to keep around. He talks too much, he's irritating, he may have said things he shouldn't have. Tony watches him and tests him and keeps turning it over. Polly doesn't know the full extent of what's happening in Tony's head. Something in him knows the trip is wrong, and he dreams about Pussy, who's cooking, because the dead here behave normally. And he asks him the only question that really matters to Polly, which is whether when his own time comes he'll stand up. Then he wakes up and starts lifting weights. Which is funny, and is also exactly right, because he's been handed an existential question and converted it into physical preparation. Can I die like a man? Better work on the body. But the timing is hard to ignore. A man currently being evaluated for murder dreams about the friend who was evaluated, condemned, and murdered by the same people. Pussy isn't just a ghost out of his past there. He's a model for Polly's immediate future, which needn't be mystical. Polly knows Tony, and he knows the situation is off, and his sleeping mind may simply be running the threat assessment his conscious mind would rather not. And then the series gives him one last irritation, which is the cat. Near the end of Made in America, there's a stray hanging around Satrial's, and it keeps staring at Christopher's photograph, not glancing, staring for long stretches. The photo gets moved, and the cat stays interested. Polly hates it, obviously, because this is his entire spiritual nightmare reduced to an animal looking at a dead man's face. He wants it gone. Tony won't let him hurt it and mocks him for the superstition, which would be more convincing if Tony weren't superstitious whenever superstition suits him. He's the one who starts talking about his luck changing after Christopher died. I don't think the cat is secretly Christopher, or Adriana, or anybody. Maybe it is. The show doesn't say, and picking one would be the exact mistake this whole thing is trying to avoid. What matters is where it leaves him. Outside Satrial's, with most of the men who used to sit there dead or missing, and an animal behaving as though there's something in a photograph worth watching, the camera occasionally behaves as though the dead have access to it. I don't think the show ever wants to go further than that. And then there's Kevin Finnerty, where even the word dream stops being safe. Junior shoots him and he goes under, and for stretches of 2 episodes he's somewhere else. The simplest description is that he's on a business trip, except the first basic fact about himself has gone wrong. His wallet and his briefcase say Kevin Finnerty, and everybody he meets treats him as Finnerty, and he keeps insisting he isn't, and keeps failing to prove it, which turns out to be surprisingly hard once the ordinary evidence is gone. No crew, no Satriales, no North Jersey, no reputation, no gun, nobody waiting for instructions, nobody who cares that he's supposed to be important. Just a man in a hotel with the wrong wallet and a name nobody else doubts. Chase has resisted calling this a dream, and I think the distinction is worth taking seriously, because the test dream jumps constantly. People become other people, places collapse into each other, films get into memories, nothing has continuity. Finnerty behaves like a place. The hotel stays a hotel. The monks remember what happened. The briefcase remains a problem. Things have consequences, and he moves through a sequence of events and gets a diagnosis and sees a beacon in the distance and keeps trying to get home. Whatever that is, it has more sustained geography than his normal dreams do. Chase has described Finnerty as an alternate version of Tony and framed the whole thing around identity and destination. Who am I, and where am I going? Which are probably the 2 questions he's spent the entire series most successfully avoiding, because he'll talk endlessly about why he's the way he is. Livia, Johnny Boy, the panic, the business, the childhood, and asking why you became Tony Soprano is a completely different exercise from asking who's left if you take Tony Soprano away. Finnerty starts taking him away. The name, the status, the work, the recognition, the biography, even his family becomes something he's trying to reach from outside. and the briefcase is the thing he keeps carrying through it. I used to want that briefcase to mean the mafia, and I think that's too small. The job's in there, obviously, but it's closer to accumulated identity. The file. Everything that tells him who he is. Then he gets to the house. Warm light, a gathering, people inside. A male figure receives him outside. There's also a shadowed female presence further in, which viewers have generally associated with Livia, and I don't think we need to decide who she literally is. The maternal feeling is doing the work, and it rhymes with Miami. Old house, woman inside, Tony approaching. Except the repetition isn't exact, and the difference is the interesting part. In Miami, something pulls him inward, and he wakes up terrified. Here he's invited, and there's a condition. Leave the case. Come in, and he can't. He's already lost his own briefcase once. He's holding somebody else's. He's spent the entire experience trying to establish that he isn't Kevin Finnerty, and now he's being asked to surrender the last portable object carrying any identity at all. He resists. Then a child's voice reaches him from somewhere, Meadow, at the hospital, and he comes back. This is where the temptation to solve it gets strongest, and I'm going to decline. Purgatory, death, an alternate universe, a coma dream, a near-death experience. Chase's own comments keep several of those alive, and choosing one doesn't improve the material. The show has spent 6 years putting dreams beside hallucinations, beside apparitions, beside psychics, beside a man who died on a table, and by the time Tony reaches that house, the uncertainty about what kind of thing we're watching is part of the experience. He doesn't know where he is. I don't see why we should. What is clear is what happens when he wakes up, because for a little while he changes. He's grateful. Every day is a gift. He's softer, he's interested in being alive, he's come about as close to death as a person gets and come back, and something takes. For a few episodes. Then it wears off, and the way it wears off is the point. He doesn't sit down one morning and decide to waste it. It erodes. The old anger comes back, and the old appetites, and the old explanations, and the new life turns back into the old life without anybody having to choose it. Which makes Finnerty the largest possible version of the experiment. Forget a strange image or a bad night. He nearly dies. He experiences something big enough that the man who made the show won't reduce it to a dream. He comes back sincerely changed. And then the series just waits to see how long sincerity lasts. And eventually he does something that makes every earlier dream look small. The crash happens at night. Christopher's badly hurt and bleeding and can't breathe properly. And what he says is that he won't pass a drug test. Tony looks at him, then looks at the damaged child seat in the back, then puts his hand over his nephew's nose and holds it there. He doesn't order this one. He doesn't hand it to Silvio or send anybody anywhere. He does it himself. And that night he dreams about Melfi, back in the office. The room from the 4th episode, the one he dreamed his whole life would invade. By now it has. And Dream Tony says things waking Tony has spent 7 years making sure she never hears. He talks about the relief. Christopher had become a burden and a danger and a disappointment, and he says how he feels about him being gone. And then he goes further and acknowledges having killed people close to him before and names his cousin and his best friend. That's about as close to a murder confession as Melfi ever gets from him, and it happens while she isn't there, which is the whole thing. Dream Tony can tell her the truth because there's no Melfi receiving it, no legal exposure, no reaction to manage, no relationship to protect, no calculation about how much to hand over. The room has her face in it, and he isn't running the room. Then he wakes up and goes to an actual session. Same office, same therapist, same dead Christopher, different Tony. The waking version is edited. He gives her a story she can respond to. An accident. A man who'd been a problem for years, addiction, somebody who hurt him, and all of that contains truth, because that's how his lying usually works. He rarely builds one out of nothing. He hands you enough true pieces to produce the conclusion he wants, and she responds with sympathy, because sympathy is the correct response to the information she was given. She can't treat a confession she never received, and I want to be fair to her about that, because this isn't a therapist absolving a murder she knows about. He constructs the patient she's allowed to treat. That's what managing the room looks like, and the show gives us both rooms inside about a day. Same material, same setting. In the first one, the truth gets out. In the second one, he chooses the dose. Then he flies to Las Vegas, sleeps with a woman connected to Christopher, takes peyote, goes into the desert, and eventually starts shouting that he gets it. Another altered state, another apparent revelation. And again, the question isn't whether he's experiencing something genuine, because he is. The relief is real, and whatever the insight is, it's real to him. Which is why Little Carmine matters so much, because he has one of the silliest dreams in the show, and he may use it better than anybody in it. He tells Tony about it late on. His father's alive again, celebrating his 100th birthday, And little Carmine has brought him a present, a beautiful box, mellifluous, because of course that's the word he'd reach for, with ribbons and presentation. Carmine opens it. It's empty. And he's disappointed, and he hands it back and tells his son to fill it and come back when he's 200. Then little Carmine explains how he eventually understood it, and Tony hears something completely different. Tony hears ambition. Your father's telling you there's more to do. Fill the box, take the title, become boss. Of course that's what he hears. Give Tony an empty box, and his first instinct is to put more things in it. Little Carmine tells him he's got it wrong, because the dream never existed by itself. There was also Nicole. He describes coming home and getting into the pool, and his wife bringing him a drink, a life he actually enjoys. And one night she tells him she has no interest in becoming the wealthiest widow on Long Island, which matters more than the box on its own. He's watched what the succession fight costs. He's seen men destroy themselves for a chair. He already has the money and the wife and the house and the children. So the dream becomes one piece of information among several, and eventually he decides the empty box isn't telling him to acquire more. It's asking what would actually fill a life, and he walks away from the race. Not out of organized crime. Let's not turn him into a monk. He's still rich and connected and living off all of this. But he gives up the chair, and men think less of him for it, and that's the part Tony could never tolerate. Tony would rather risk being killed than be thought weak. Little Carmine takes the insult, gets called a lightweight and an idiot, and goes home alive, which produces one of the strangest ironies in the whole series. Tony has spent years with a psychiatrist. He's studied himself. He's analyzed his dreams. He's got the vocabulary, transference, depression, panic, the mother, the father, and he's had more sustained psychological attention than anybody in this world. Little Carmine is treated like an idiot by everyone, and little Carmine tells him a dream, and he interprets it wrong. The man who spent 7 years learning to inspect his own mind hears an empty box and thinks more. The idiot hears the same box and thinks enough. That's the actual difference, and it isn't that little Carmine treats the dream as prophecy. He doesn't obey his dead father. He combines the dream with the life he already values, his wife, his home, his fear, what he's watched happen to other men, and then arranges his behavior around what he concludes, which is what healthy interpretation looks like. Not what does this symbol mean, but what does this tell me about the life I want, and every part of that process is available to Tony. More dreams, more insight, a professional to discuss them with, a family, money, several genuine chances to leave. What he doesn't have is a life outside Tony Soprano that he values enough to protect. That's what the briefcase is about. Little Carmine can put something down because there's somewhere else he wants to be. Tony gets to the house and looks inside, and when they ask him to set the case down, he doesn't know who's left without it. And once you can see that, all of it starts lining up differently. Christopher's murdered man comes back because the murder never quite became a career achievement. Pussy kills a witness and goes on threatening him in his sleep because solving a problem doesn't erase what you did to solve it. Silvio dreams about a rat trap because killing the rat never answered how he failed to see him. Junior's own head puts a price on the word never. Melfi's unconscious turns Tony into responsibility and then a weapon and then desire, and every time she decides what the feeling gets to become, Tony's guilt about Gloria is genuine and turns into compensation instead of change. Carmela's fantasies build an exit with Furio, and her dreams push her toward Adriana until the truth starts colliding with the life she wants. Adriana imagines a road out while she's already on the way to the woods. Polly is frightened of hell for years and never arrives at the idea of doing less of what sends people there. Tony gets stripped of his name and comes back grateful for a while, and little Carmine gets an empty box. None of these people are short of information. That's what I had wrong for a long time, because the clean version of this argument is that they dream and they understand and they don't change, and it's too simple. They do change sometimes. They act. Tony acts on Pussy. Melfi refuses the revenge. Carmela starts moving toward an investigation. Little Carmine rearranges his whole relationship with power. Tony comes out of the coma genuinely different for a while. The information goes somewhere, so insight isn't the dividing line, and emotion isn't either, because Polly is terrified. Intelligence isn't, because Tony is far more psychologically articulate than little Carmine. Access to help isn't, because Tony has Melfi and little Carmine has a wife by a swimming pool. The difference turns up later than any of that. It turns up at the price. Melfi gives up the revenge. Little Carmine gives up the title. Adriana tries to give up the entire structure and it kills her. Carmela follows the question about Adriana until following it gets expensive, and then the house starts moving again. Christopher is offered another life and can't surrender the identity this one gave him. Paulie thinks damnation may be waiting and still can't imagine being anybody but Paulie, and Tony keeps arriving at thresholds. That's the image I keep coming back to. The old house in Miami, the workman's clothes, the woman on the stairs. Then the house at the end of the coma, the warm light, the gathering, the briefcase. He doesn't lack warnings. He doesn't lack dreams or therapists or a near-death experience or ghosts if you believe they're ghosts or guilt. He doesn't even lack self-awareness. He can tell you where a great deal of it came from, his mother and his father and his childhood and the ducks. He knows, which is what makes this show so much darker than a story about a man who can't understand himself. He understands enormous amounts, and the series gives Tony extraordinary access to his own interior life for a television criminal. And after every revelation, there's still the morning. That's where the test actually happens, because the dream is free and the morning costs something. Melfi had to decide whether revenge was worth becoming a person who orders it. Little Carmine had to decide whether the chair was worth making Nicole a widow. Carmela had to decide how far she'd follow a question about a girl she loved. Christopher had to decide whether he could give up the only identity that ever made him feel like somebody. And Tony had to decide whether knowing where his life came from put him under any obligation to build a different one. No dream can do that part for anybody. A dream can assemble the whole room. It can bring the dead back and sit them down to eat. Turn a friend into a fish. Turn a gangster into a dog. Put your mother inside your therapist, and your therapist inside your girlfriend. Put your father's car around you with your wife at the wheel. Take a coach you haven't seen in 40 years and stand him in front of you and have him say you wasted it. It can take your name off you, hand you a stranger's briefcase, and walk you up to a house with the lights on. It can show you almost anything. It can't make you put anything down, which is why the first one matters as much as it does. Tony fed the ducks. They left. He collapsed. He dreamed about a bird taking part of him away, and very early in the therapy, with some help, he understood what his own mind was telling him: family, loss, the fear that everybody he loves is going to disappear. He got it. At the beginning. There's no 6-season mystery here. He spends the rest of the series collecting evidence for something he understood almost immediately. His mother, Pussy, Gloria, Carmela, AJ, Meadow, Christopher, Jr. Everybody leaves somehow, by death or betrayal or distance or just growing up. And he keeps trying to build a life where losing people can be controlled. Threaten them, pay them, own them, forgive them, kill them first. Anything that prevents the helplessness of standing next to an empty pool. It never works, because that was never the part he'd failed to understand. Tony fed those ducks and lost them and dreamed about losing them, and very early in therapy he understood what the dream was about. He spent 6 more years afraid of exactly the same thing.